Welcome to this new lesson in the photography masterclass. This is a full editing demonstration of editing a portrait. This is more of a creative portrait, but I want to show you some cool effects to get some neat sort of shallow depth of field, some techniques that I typically do when doing a creative portrait edit. So the first thing that I like to do is crop. So I'm going to take my crop and let's see, what if I wanted this to be a portrait or a profile pic? It's probably going to be a square. So I'm going to take a 1:1 aspect ratio and crop right in there. Actually, let's go back and let's go into our crop. Let's slightly rotate so that the eyes are going to be level. All right, next we go through our basic adjustments. White balance looks good for now. I think we were using daylight bulbs, so adjusting to daylight actually makes it a perfect white balance. 5500, 5600, something like that. Looks pretty good. Next, let's go through our exposure. So with this one, I do want to be a little creative with it. So add some more contrast to it, make the blacks a little bit darker, the whites a little bit whiter. Shadows, we'll bring up the shadows just to get a little bit of detail back in the hair. The highlights, I'll bring down. I can either bring the highlights up and the whites down, or the highlights down and the whites up. I think with the whites up and the highlights down, it looks a little bit more contrasty the way that I'm wanting it. With clarity, vibrance, and saturation, I'm not going to do much. There's not anything I want to increase the saturation of in this photo. I'm going to leave the tone curve for last to see if I want to add any sort of contrast at the end. There's also nothing I want to do with HSL or split toning here. I showed you how to get creative with split toning, but I don't really want to do that. The only thing I might do is see what this looks like as a grayscale image. Actually, that could be pretty cool if I want to make it a sort of grayscale, sort of stylistic photo. But let me turn that off for now because I'm going to leave it like that, make my other sort of adjustments, and get back to it. One thing I want to do is play with the depth of field. The eyes are the most important part of the image, but sometimes I like to have a little bit more fall off. And this is a way you can create sort of fake shallow depth of field, especially with his neck, his shirt. So what I'm going to do is take a radial filter, make sure I reset everything. Let me just create an oval and I'll put it around his eyes. So for this one, I actually do want to select everything outside of his eyes. So I'm going to choose the outside option and I'm going to drop the sharpness all the way. Turn off mask so I can see what's happening. So I'm dropping the sharpness just around the eyes, and maybe the clarity I'll drop just a little bit too, something like that. But what I want to do is brush back some parts where I want the focus to be. So I'm going to choose my brush. I'm going to take the minus, turn back on the mask. Let's turn down our flow to like 25, increase the brush size, increase the feathering to 100, something like that. And I'm just going to brush over his nose, his mouth. Those are things that I want to be in focus. The front part of his ear, his hair, something like that. Maybe more around his eyebrows too. Maybe his chin, but let's decrease the size just a little bit. Something like that. Now let's turn off the mask to see what that does. So we can see the before and after. Let's turn off overlay so we can see how it creates sort of a more shallow depth of field. Pretty cool, huh? A creative way to do that through editing. Okay, so let's get back to our edit. Now, I think I want to add a little bit more shallow depth of field around his whole head. So I'm going to click the new radial filter brush. We can leave the sharpness and clarity as is. I'm just going to create a circle. It's actually best to go from the middle. Create a circle around his face like so. Let's turn on the mask so we can see. Feathering, let's decrease a little bit. Make it a little wider, a little taller, something like that. So now we're getting even a shallower depth of field for his neck and even his ears, which looks pretty cool. One thing that can look good for skin is to actually decrease the clarity of skin just a little bit so that it softens it up and it gets rid of some of those details. So I'm going to take the adjustment brush. I'm gonna make sure that all my settings are reset, except for, I mean, clarity is fine, but let me just reset that and turn on mask. And let me just brush over his skin. We'll set the flow a little higher. Same with density. So we're just gonna soften up the skin just a little bit. We're not making it out of focus, it's just making it softer. And if we go too much, we can always erase. So let's decrease the size. Erase by holding the Option key. Don't need to get his hair over there. Over there. That looks pretty good. His eyebrows don't necessarily need as well. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. So now with that selection made, let's take our clarity and bring it down. Say like negative 80 or so. If we go undo, before and after, see how it kind of softens the skin just a little bit? Might want to brush in a little bit. Right there. Looks pretty good. All right, so let's make his eyes pop a little bit more. We're gonna use the brush again, click new, reset our clarity. We're gonna zoom in here a lot. So let's zoom into the eyes so we can really brush in where we want. Take our brush, decrease our size. And I'm really just trying to get in the whites of his eye. Depending on how big your photo is, you might not go down to a brush size 2 when you're editing a photo of someone's eyes. It might be down to 20 and it's the perfect size. Let me just go around here, like so. That looks pretty good. All right, turn off the mask. We'll just bring up the whites just a little bit. You don't want to go too far, especially you don't want to do exposure because that starts to look scary, evil Sam, but just the whites a little bit. Now let's click new. I'm going to paint over his pupil and his iris. So let's paint over. Let's turn on mask so I can see what I'm painting. That looks pretty good. Paint over here. And we're just going to bring out some of that color and clarity in his eyes. I'm going to get rid of holding Option to paint off that part down there. Okay, so let's turn off our mask. Here, let's increase the clarity. Let's increase the saturation. And maybe bring up the shadows. Yeah, bring up the shadows. That's good. If you want to change the color of the eye slightly, you can do so with the temperature. Make it more red, green. We're not going to do that, so let's reset that white balance back. But I think that looks pretty good. His eyes pop just a little bit more from before. So let's go ahead and see the before and after. See how his eyes pop just a little bit more? I think they do anyways. You can go a little bit further maybe with that exposure adjustment as well. So now I'm done with those adjustments. So let's go back to our tone curve and see if we want to add a little bit more contrast using the point method. Creating just like a little S curve. When you do that, you start to get a little bit more saturation than I want, because when you increase contrast, the colors become a little bit more saturated. I actually kind of like the image before without that contrast, so I'm just going to select these 2 points and delete them. And then let's go to the grayscale tab, convert to grayscale. See before and after, before and after. You lose all those sort of details and color adjustments we made with the eyes, and everything is a little bit less detailed in the edits we made with grayscale. So I'm going to leave it as colored. The last thing I want to do is add a vignette actually with this image. So let's decrease the vignette slider amount to create a black or dark vignette. Increase the feathering. Adjust the midpoint to go in slightly, which I like. Awesome, so that's starting to look good. When I'm looking at it now though, I'm thinking that Sam doesn't pop out from the background enough. So what I want to do is adjust the background. Let's use a graduated filter. So you have that selected. Just reset everything by clicking the minus button on one and then resetting that selection if you want, or going one at a time, and then just click and drag. Now I'm going to use my range mask for color, I believe will work best. Use my eyedropper to select the background. And look at that, it did a pretty good job. Let's change the color range. Actually, that looks pretty good. What we can do is just brush out his eyes because I don't want his eyes selected. So with our brush on minus, Let's just brush out the selections on his face, which works perfectly. So now let's turn off our mask and let's increase the exposure of the background. Maybe make it darker. Yeah, I actually like it darker. I thought I was going to make it brighter to make him pop out a little bit more, but I think making it darker looks pretty good. There's other ways that you can make selections that we'll learn in a future lesson about removing backgrounds, but this is an easy way to edit a background, a blank background, right within the camera raw. All right, this is the before and after. I hope you liked my edit. Let me know if you have any questions about what I did, what I didn't do. If you have edits of your own, we would love to see them. Go ahead to post them to social media, tag us so we can check them out, or post them to the course page so that we can see them there. We'd love to check them out. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in another lesson.